This is a ManeHustle Media Podcast.
Yo, this is Sharmane from the Single Simulcast. And when I'm not making you laugh or making up parody songs, I'm kicking back, listening to Militantly Mixed.
Hey y'all, welcome to Militantly Mixed, a podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your host, Sharmane, aka Mixed Girl Maine, and this is the first week of Women's History Month. And I am going to pretend like I was super smart about this and hella strategic, and that I planned this the whole time. But this month's guests all happen to be mixed race women podcasters. I recently joined a WOC podcasting resources and support group on Facebook, and through generic conversations about podcasting things, it became obvious that there was a few mixed race women on that platform. And so I reached out to them to invite them over to my show. And it just so happened to stack up that I have enough of them to include in this month. So that's what we're going to do. The theme of this Women's History Month for Militantly Mixed will be mixed race women podcasters. So we're going to get into, we got some good stuff. We're going to talk about race, obviously, and our own personal identities and how we roll that into our podcasting. We're going to talk about our podcasts. We're going to try to glow up and grow up together in support of these endeavors of the amazing mixed race women that I have for this month's shows. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm excited to share that with y'all. But before I do that, it has been a couple weeks since I've had a proper Militantly Mixed intro. The last couple episodes, or at least a few of the episodes last month, I just kind of jumped right in because the people that I had spoken to, I either knew well or well-ish, or spoke to a little bit more regularly. They're people that are kind of in my life in one way or another. So we just kind of jumped in without the intro because I felt like it was already going to be, I already had the background and the rapport with those folks to just kind of jump in. So it's been a few weeks since I did my normal Patreon shout out and sort of talking about what's going on in, I guess, my world. So I'm going to do a little bit of that to catch up with y'all, and then we'll jump into today's show. So this last couple of weeks have been a little bit tough. This last month actually has been kind of tough for me personally. For those of you who do listen to all of my shows, may be aware that I have 5 Star Wars Extended Universe named cats, and that they're my whole world, and I love them more than almost all of humanity. And 2 of them, my older boys, have been really sick lately. We had to go to the hospital emergency room a couple times, so it's been a kind of tough month. Because of their procedures and all that kind of stuff, I can't really afford everything that they need to get them better. So it's been kind of tough to be on for podcasting and keep up on all my shows and everything while also dealing with this, because I can feel anything that happens to my cats, I just feel like, crumbling and falling apart. So I've been trying to stay up on it. I hope that the content and the quality of my shows hasn't reflected sort of what's been going on in my life, but I'm doing my best to try to keep up on everything and keep everything going, because I definitely don't want to slow down. And this is one of the things that gives me life on a weekly basis. But yeah, it's been a little bit tough. So I think I've slowed down a little bit on social media posting and all that kind of stuff because of what I got going on. But I will try to keep up on it. Just know that I'm still here. I'm still mixed as fuck. I'm still podcasting my big old butt off, and I'm just trying to make sure that I balance everything that I got going on and try to keep paying close attention to my mental health, trying to have some self-care, things like that, because I will say that at present where I'm at mentally in my life, I feel a little overwhelmed. So I'm gonna keep trying. The other thing is I've been hella busy. Luckily I've been invited to be a guest or a participant on a number of different podcasts recently. So for those of you who have been with me a while, you've probably heard me talk about Why So Serious before. I've been on that show a number of times, and actually this month in particular, I think I was on the show like 2 or 3 times. And I've been a guest on actually Blurred Comics. Both Blurred Vision and myself have been guests on Take a Knee for Marvel vs. DC. That episode aired this last week, so if you want to hear me and my co-host on the other show talk about comics and other blurred things, go ahead and download that episode. It's an open mic episode of Take a Knee for Marvel vs. DC, and that was hilarious. That was a fun night. a really good night to have after you've had such a tough month. And then yesterday, I was a guest on the Old Man Wade show, which is another Blurred show out there. And we started in talking about a couple of things and ended up going off on crazy, or we started out with a plan to talk about certain things, but we ended up going off a tangent. We had a good old time. I think we ended up talking for like 3.5 hours. So he is splitting what was supposed to be one episode with me into 2 episodes with me next week. So those should come out soon as well. So I've just been really lucky to be invited as a guest on several shows to talk about things that I really love to talk about, which is race and comic books. And yeah, that's pretty much my whole life. Race, comic books, and cats. That's all I talk about. I've also been a guest on, and I'm not sure when these episodes are going to air, but I've been a guest on Fear and Desire with Issa Rory. He and I have been chatting about, he's in the UK and I'm here in the US, so we've been chatting in the wee hours of the night about race and marriage and family and comic books and all kinds of things. And then most recently, because throughout our conversation, he learned about me being polyamorous. He had more questions about that. So we've been sending each other questions and audio clips about polyamory as well. So yeah, he's going to cut those into an episode soon, and I'll be able to let y'all know when I'm on that. So oddly enough, on this show, you mostly hear about my racial side of my life. You don't often get to hear about my bisexual polyamorous side or my atheism or anything like that, my comic books, my filmmaking or anything like that. But I talk about those topics on almost everybody else's show but my own, and also on Blurred Comics as well. So if you do feel like you don't know me as well as you know my guests here on Militantly Mixed, you can check out some of those other shows and you'll learn a lot more about me than you get on this show. It's just nice to know that you can like develop these relationships with other podcasters and actually like have real connections with folks that are interested in the same types of things you are. But because I'm sort of an ambivert and don't often like to be in the presence of people, I get to be social and not be in-person social. It's awesome. So I've made some really good friends in podcasting. Okay, so that was a whole lot of stuff about me and things that I've been up to, but that's not necessarily what Militantly Mixed is about. So let's get into today's episode. Today's episode, my guest is Jacqui Oh. She is the host of the StartDis Podcast, a platform for grassroots experts by education and or experience. She covers all sorts of topics. It's basically a open discussion with a person who is either an expert by education or by personal experience in any type of topic that has to do with what's going on in the world today: addiction, mental illness, adoption, birth control, DNA, race, sexuality, politics, all kinds of stuff. She covers all sorts of topics. And she is of Indonesian and Jewish ethnic heritage, but she also has a cultural upbringing or additional upbringing in her life with Colombian heritage as well. Her father was fully Jewish ethnic wise, but was raised in a family of Colombian folks, and so they have that element of transracialness in their family as well. And then she is also married to a mixed race person, so she is a mixed race woman married to a mixed race man who has mixed race children, and she grew up with a father who is transracial. So she's just checking off a whole lot of boxes for me in this show, and it was really fun to get to chat with her. I'm really excited to be able to share this episode with you. But before I do that, and since I haven't done it in a while, just a reminder that Militantly Mixed is a fan-sponsored podcast, and with your support, it helps us to continue to grow and achieve the goals of building this community of mixed race people around the world. Right now, there are 2 ways in which you can sponsor the show. You can go to patreon.com/militantlymix and donate on a monthly basis, and there are different reward levels depending on what level of sponsorship you're willing to participate in. And if you would like to hit us with a one-time only donation or just kind of a sporadic, I'll hit you here, $10 here, $5 there, $1 there, you can also go to our paypal.me/militantly mixed page and drop us a couple of bucks there. The way I view this in terms of the way I donate to podcasts is really just like if the podcast gives me life or gives me education or gives me something that I don't have elsewhere, it is free entertainment, and I want them to know that I appreciate their support. So I drop a couple bucks here and there. Unless they have a Patreon, there are a couple of shows that I do sponsor on Patreon as well. And it's a good way to help the podcaster keep things going. As I've mentioned before, with the current sponsorship that we receive, we are able to cover our hosting fees. So that allows my show to be broadcast on iTunes and Stitcher and SoundCloud and YouTube, and all the major podcast platforms that are out there. I know there's a number of them that I never list, but it's just because my RSS feed shoots it out to all of these places. And so that's really invaluable for me in terms of my efforts. It does help a lot in terms of getting things out there to y'all. And for anything additional that we receive, that's just banking and saving it up to help us improve our audio quality and everything like that, production value and stuff. I have been able to upgrade my microphones, and recently I've had to upgrade my editing softwares because I was rocking some software from 2012 that I was holding on to for dear life. And so it's with the sponsorship of the show that I am able to do that, and I'm very, very appreciative of it. Thank you to the folks that are sponsoring us. And yeah, so that's it. Let's get into today's episode because I've been blabbering on long enough. Let's hit it. So this week we are joined by Jacqui Oh. She is a fellow mixed race podcaster. And why don't you tell everybody about yourself? Let us know about your ethnic background and everything like that, and we'll get into it.
Okay, so, hey, I'm Jacqui.
Hi, Jacqui.
And, hey, that is Jacqui. No, I did not choose to spell it that way. My family gave it to me that way. But, you know, I own it. And my mix, my mother is Indonesian, my father is Jewish, and I am, like we said, a host of another podcast called StartDis. It's the StartDis Podcast, and so that's the intro.
All right. So we connected through a shared women of color podcaster group or whatever, and I forget what our triggering conversation was, but I know that whenever somebody says something in anything, I'm just like, ooh, can I talk to you? So whatever it was, you said something that made me ask you if it was cool for me to message you offline or whatever. But we have gotten a chance to talk already, so I know a little bit about you. But why don't you go ahead and tell our audience sort of what it was like kind of coming up as a mixed Indonesian Jewish kid. And then you also mentioned the kind of different dynamic with your father in that he is slightly transracial. He was later in life raised by a family of a different culture. So why don't we get into that?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers there. And let me just say, I don't exactly remember the tick that we had either to connect, but something that I was really leery about in joining, and this is something that is rooted in my childhood, but something that in joining any person or woman of color group, it makes me nervous because I'm not Black, and so I think that there's a misconception that you have to be, and that there's not some, I don't know. I've had that
I got you.
in my life, so. It's like it was nerve-wracking for me to enter the group that we met in, and but at the end of the day, like, nobody has given me any grief about anything, and it's been really supportive. And you guys are all above that level where it's beyond that. You guys know.
Yeah.
You don't. It's beyond that. So that's just that was my own insecurity coming into the group.
Right. I feel like it's primarily through white people that, sorry, white people, that, they tend to kind of blanket like women of color and mean Black when they say, mean Black woman when they say it. But to me, it's always been the way especially as a mixed person, that I've distinguished myself from being full black. Like if I'm talking about being black, I'm just talking about being black right now. But I'll say about people that are non-black POCs, I'll say that non-black POC or non-black WOC or something like that. But I find it's interesting that you say that, because I find that also with the term mixed, because, you know, I call my show militantly mixed because I think of myself as militantly mixed, but it's harder for me to find guests that are non-black mixes, because primarily people hear the word mixed and they think black and white mix. They don't think it's any other kinds of racially mixed folks. So it's interesting that you brought it up, because I do think that that is a weird thing that people have put on these phrases or these words or titles and don't quite get that, like, this is the best way we can make sense of separating. I was about to say separating us from white folks, but that's not quite how I think of it. Distinguishing us as women that are intersectional, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That works.
Yeah. And I know that phrase intersectional has been, I don't want to say exploited, but just really used a lot. But I like it. I think it fits how I feel. So to answer your question about when I was a kid, I have a little anecdote that I've shared with people close to me, but I've never shared publicly. And so something that I've actually been corrected on recently, like I said, I'm totally open to, you know, share my own bias in being mixed myself and just like navigating that and understanding that. But I was corrected in that I'm actually not first generation here. I'm second generation here. So I think I told you that before. So I was born here in America. I am American. I'm an American citizen. My mom is not. The rest of my family is not, right. Actually. So
you're kind of like me in that half of your family makes you first generation and the other half makes you second generation. So like, what do you align yourself with, I think is kind of it, right?
Right. And it's you know, it's complicated, but I'm trying to understand, you know, like, okay, yes, I was born here, just to be clear. I was born in Seattle. So, you know, that gives some good context, because I feel like if there's some listeners out there in Seattle, it's a pretty common mix to have white and Asian or Jewish and Asian, and really anything in Asian up there, to be honest. But when I was small, I was able to read. I know that. So I was a really big snoop. You know, I like ruined Santa Claus for myself and everything.
Nice.
So yeah, right. And this was before Santa. This is before I ruined myself for Santa, but I was snooping in my mom's room, and I think she had asked me to get something out of there. I don't remember what, but you know, I was going through her stuff. And I had found a picture of her, and I'm probably 7 years old. And all I see is, I thought my life turned into a movie at this point. It's a green picture of my mom, and it says alien on it. And I freaked
out. Oh my gosh.
I was like, oh my God, my mom's an alien. And I remember keeping it to myself for like a couple days. You know, I don't really know how long it was,
right.
But just like really thinking my life was turned upside down, and this is real. You know, you see this on cartoons and in the movie, but this is really happening to me, you know?
Yeah.
And it's a green card. So, you know, like it's a literal green card that says alien with my mom's face on it. And I am just like interpreting that as, how do I approach my mom about this? What is she going to do? You know, take me back to her home planet. Like,
right. Oh my gosh. Do you remember how old you were? You were like maybe 5 or something?
I was probably 6. I mean, I knew how to read, so I was, you know, around that age. I knew how to read that, and I finally had to tell my mom. And I don't remember exactly how it went, but I was just like, "Hey, I found this. What the heck? Like, you gotta be honest with me." And then she explained to me what that really meant, and you know, at the time you don't really understand, but that was jarring to me as a child.
Oh my god!
So that shows how American I really am.
Right. Yeah, because you don't even think, like, that was a term that was used, and it's funny because I'm kind of thinking about, so like you, I'm second generation American in that both of my grandmothers are have immigrated here from other places and stuff, and they were a big part of who raised me. So I kind of feel like first generation because I had like direct upbringing from them. And then both of my grandfathers are American, but I know with my Japanese grandmother more than my British grandmother, the words alien or oriental, all of these outdated ideas were still a part of her life and a part of her world because of when she came to America. Whereas with my Caucasian grandmother, my British grandmother, she was basically a American who happens to have a British accent. Like they didn't put her through any of the things that they put my Japanese grandma through to become an American citizen. So yeah, like I can imagine how jarring that is to see those words when you're little, see those words on a green card, and you'd be like, I mean, you probably had all kind of crazy questions like, the picture is green because the card is green, so is my mom covering something up? You know, like there's probably all kinds of crazy questions that you had as a little kid.
I literally thought my mom was an alien from space for a weekend.
Oh my God.
I was terrified. And, and then like she explains it to me, but that's something that you had asked me when we were pre-funking was like, what was a fly for you? And it was for me because of being first or second generation, whatever the right term is here, is that I didn't, that my grandparents, my mom was very, you're going to speak English, you're going to be American. Like, that's it. Right. Mm-hmm. But she would speak on the phone to my grandparents and then they would speak to me. And at this point they're trilingual. So they're speaking Indonesian. They're also speaking Dutch, because Indonesia is a colony, of the Dutch. And, something else that, when I was, I've been really excited to do the show with you. And so I was just thinking about and I'll get to the Jewish side, don't worry about it. But on my Indonesian side, we've been mixed on that side since pimpin's been pimpin' since pimpin'. You know what I'm saying?
Right. So
I think I went back about 6 or 7 generations to track actually. And I had this for a while, but it goes back to that's how when the first mix actually happened.
Oh, wow. And how did that play out culturally for them? Do you know?
Well, nothing compares to how, slavery has played out in the U.S., but that's what I would compare it to is just, a white guy with a Native woman, and it's a forbidden love type, not supposed to be, not a, not a bad thing, just a forbidden love type thing. And,
right.
And then
the bird and the fish type analogy.
Right. And that just kept happening. And, then this gets thrown in and that gets thrown in. But essentially at the end of the day, it all was happening in Indonesia. So, I haven't taken a DNA test. So yeah,
I was just thinking, but you could be probably certain that there's actual Dutch people earlier, like six or seven generations back, in addition to the native people and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Is it beyond just the Dutch? Because weren't the French there for a while too?
Yeah, and it gets mixed, but because my grandfather was in the Dutch Indo War over there, that's when the racial stuff gets charged. So you hear the words like mixed breed. That's not okay to say to Indos or to my family. Like that's not.
Let's just keep the word breed term out of us altogether. I mean, every time you hear mixed breed, half breed, mongrel, all that. Let's just stop, people.
Yeah, exactly. So, it gets into that. But my family on that side had a Dutch name all the way through. So you think of it just like a slave name,
Got it. Yeah. That makes sense.
And honestly, so my mom and my dad, they hyphenated my name. So I had the Dutch name and I had the Jewish name together. And it was a pain in the ass. It was a pain in the ass in school. And my mom worked for the airlines. And so I would fly for free. But the stipulation was you had to fly standby, and they would call your name out on the speaker, right? And because my name was 16 letters long and foreign sounding, they are looking for a terrorist when they're calling my name. They're like, Jacqueline, the whole thing. And I'm just like, yeah, it's me. Yeah, especially post 9/11, that's fun. So that was my first little taste. Going back to the languages, I didn't understand my grandparents half the time when we were on the phone, and I was really ashamed. I was just like, okay. So because they speak English, they speak Dutch, and they speak Indonesian, and they would go in and out of each language, and I would be completely lost.
Yeah, I feel like that was the case too, because when my Japanese grandmother got here, they put her through what was basically yellow bride classes to Americanize them, Japanese war bride classes. And so it was like all the foreign, primarily different Asian brides, and they would go to the military base, and they would learn English, and they would learn how to keep house as an American wife. But they were domestic classes. That's all they were. And they were told not to teach their kids Japanese because you'll confuse them, or whatever languages that the women had, that they were only to associate with other wives of white soldiers. So like if there was an Asian woman who happened to have married a black soldier, she would only be allowed in her classes. She would only be told that you can associate with other families where the soldier was black, like never the twin shall meet type of thing. And it was sort of this sort of sanctioned mixedness where now the Japanese women were referred to as white because they married a white man or a black man. So my grandmother married a white man, and she had to associate with other Asian brides who married white men. And so to get her to speak Japanese to us was like pulling teeth, because the military told her not to do it, and she was always afraid of deportation. And so she would drop Japanese words in here and there. So there are some words that, I only knew in Japanese that I didn't know in English until I went to school and all that kind of stuff. But she would be paranoid about like, never let white people see you talk in Japanese or even broken Japanese, because then they'll send me back to Japan. Did your mother come here through a military situation, or just came here to come here?
No, it was more of a refugee situation. Okay. So first she had to go through the Dutch channels because it's a Dutch colony. Okay. But because there was such racism there, because of them being mixed, they came here. And so it was actually under a sponsorship, if you will.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they were sponsored by a church and then came out here. So, it's funny when you talk about that, like, because my mom was that way, just, it wasn't a military thing, but it was like, she wanted me to speak English, and now I teach English to Asian children, but, which is, awesome, but it's just kind of how that manifests in my, my kid days into now. But
right.
The funny thing is that she didn't speak English very well.
Oh.
I mean, like sometimes it would be okay, and then I grew up saying things that just weren't right, and then I would be made fun of, and I'd be like,
I have some of that too.
Yeah, like an island, in the street, that's a roundy round. That was a roundy round on my driver's test. You know what I'm saying? Like,
oh, no.
So there were just some fob mentalities and ways that came through. Also, the word Oriental was used in my family, right? And I had to tell them that wasn't okay.
Same. It drives me nuts. I would always be like, Grandma, Oriental is a rug or a dish, not a person. And she'd be like, that's what we call. Like, that's it. That's what we call, and that's it. You're done.
Like, okay, you're being ignorant.
I know. You don't have to be a rug or a dish. Like, come on.
So, and I was telling you, and this is something that it confuses some people, but I'm glad it didn't confuse you. And a little later in, like that was when I was younger, but I was in school, and I was in Catholic school, which is confusing because I'm also Jewish, right. And people can't mesh those together. So just for a quick explanation.
How do you stand in the same space without exploding?
Well, you stand in secret a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure.
Just being real. And I told you, like, you weren't surprised because other people like do it, but I wasn't the only one, but I was the other one, if that makes sense.
Got it, yeah.
So there were two of us, and it's because both of our fathers were and our mothers weren't, so there's that line.
Yeah.
And also just on my family side, it just wasn't, and my dad was kind of a black sheep anyway, but not that I was totally out of it, but I was never bat mitzvahed, just to be clear. Right. And I was never baptized, just to be clear.
Would you have been able to, because I know some sects, there is you have to have a Jewish mother thing. Would you have been able to have a bat mitzvah if you wanted to go down that path?
I think if my family would have pushed for it, or I would have pushed for it, I think it would have been a possibility.
Okay.
I think it would have been hard. I think they would have made me fully convert. I don't think that I would have been in Catholic school anymore.
Got it. Okay.
But I think it would have been much easier for me to get baptized. I think that because they really pushed for that when I was there. And so, but I never did that. I never went to Sunday school. I never was confirmed. But I know my Bible verses pretty darn well. So, Catholic school definitely influenced me in a huge, huge way. But it's like a lot of people have their opinions on what makes you Jewish and what doesn't make you Jewish. And there's a lot of layers to that. So it's complicated,
Right.
But you've had other Jewish people on here before too, right? So
yeah, and it's come up a few times, and I don't know where I picked up that little nugget of information I've had about the Jewish mother being the line you trace or whatever, but it's just one of those things that had always stuck. And so if I do happen to have a guest that has a Jewish origin, I ask that question. Because I imagine that also adding to it that they're a mixed race person, the complications that go along with that, like if you're allowed to be ethnically considered Jewish because you have a Jewish mother, but your father is black or Cuban, say, but here you get to have on your stamp, I'm Jewish. What does that mean for your mixed identity? Things like that. And I think in particular with Jewish people, because there's so many different ways that they're allowed to talk about race or like they have their own version of racism towards them. There's so many complicated things about Jewish people to me as an outsider that when you couple it with the mixedness, like I got a bunch of questions. Let's get into it. Let's try to figure out what this would be like for you as a mixed Jewish person. It just seems slightly more complicated than like other whitish people. And
I've consciously told people that I identify with being Jewish as a race. And this is why. Me racially. I would say I'm racially Jewish.
Right.
Because on the things that I don't do I hold Shabbat holy? No. Do I eat kosher anymore? I did grow up kosher. But no, I don't eat kosher anymore. But, did I have a bat mitzvah? No. Do I practice holidays? All of them. Do I,
all the Jewish and the quote unquote Christian holidays, or just all the Jewish?
Yes.
Okay.
Both. I celebrate both. I grew up celebrating both. And the reason why I go into the racial aspect of it is because that's been a part of my life. So my dad and my aunt, they're the only ones on their side. And so, of course, my aunt has, if she has a child, which she does, she's full Jewish, and that's how it was treated. My dad married a Catholic woman, so I'm not, right? But I wasn't just like outed out of the family. So, but my dad is, like I said, the black sheep. And if you ask him, he will say that he doesn't identify as Jewish at all. So, as far as religiously, and he was bar mitzvah, the whole Jewish. But so basically when I went to my cousin's bar mitzvah, now my cousin, this is a cousin from a whole different side, but the cousin who's my aunt's, so the full Jewish cousin that I have, her father is Christian. So that's just show you same mix, just different sex parent,
right.
Who gets dibs, right?
Yeah, it's so bizarre.
It is bizarre, but I admire that in the Jewish culture and that it's female empowering. That's how I feel about it. But at the same time, because race is recognized through looks, my first really impression of that was from my family directly. I mean, society, I got that a lot, but they thought that I looked like them, and she looked like, maybe more so at the time, her Christian side, her father's side. And there was no ifs, ands, or buts about making that clear that was favorable. And
I can't say more Jewish, ethnic.
Oh yeah,
Jewish. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so it was like I felt bad for my cousin in that sense, but I also felt like I'm finally accepted.
And it's such a weird thing because you don't get to be technically called Jewish, but you have the look. She doesn't have as much of the look, but she gets to be called it just by nature of the roll of the dice. She happens to have a Jewish mother. And so I wonder if that would even cause conflict between you two if because other people made you aware of the preference of looking Jewish. Well,
and that's the thing is that, like I said, I can't tell you verbatim what was said, but it was clear at the time that was, and I know that it was my aunt, and she's kind of a crazy person, but, went, not her mom, a different one, but went into the details of it. And there are some stereotypes that come out when you think about how Jewish people look. And I hit more of those than I do the Asian stereotypes. And I was hit with that a lot with society as well. So as much as I can say, I'm a human and peace and love and, tofu and all that stuff, like, I do love that. But, it's like, I did experience, because I was open about it. And once I felt that acceptance, it's like that night, just being naive, and I experienced a lot of hate for being Jewish in high school, and I think that's why I wear it a lot stronger these days.
Oh, okay.
So I think it was more like society's like, yep, this is you, and I'm like, yeah, hear me roar. You know what I mean?
I see, yeah. Okay.
But it was not new to me. There was a lot of jokes, but more so people think, nowadays people have cameras to do this. I was in high school 10 years ago, so not quite there yet. And, or when I graduated anyway. So, but there would be kids that didn't, and this is in Seattle, where I feel like Seattle's pretty culturally like diverse and sensitive, but it just goes to show there's douches everywhere.
Yeah.
That maybe it wasn't so much rooted in hate, but in ignorance of, they would just line the halls and Heil Hitler as I'm walking down.
Wow, what?
Yeah.
See, this happened recently in the news, right? There were some high school kids that did the Heil Hitler for a prom photo or some shit like that. And
yeah, that's not new to me.
Here's what I don't understand. When we learn about this, we're told the whole time, this is a hate thing. This is, they were the enemy to us, blah, 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 blah. So if this is how we are it's not like you're exposed to it and you're like, hey, that looks cool, and then later you find out that they were an enemy to us or whatever. You're learning that the entire time. So how do kids just walk around doing it like it ain't no thing? It's
because they grew up around thinking it ain't no thing.
I just don't understand. Like, it amazes me when you can grow up in the same kind of situations as people and turn out like so completely different from them that it would never have occurred to me at any point. Like, oh, what would be funny right now? It would never have occurred to me. So it amazes me that that's actually something that even in I guess so about 10 years ago or so. So like, the teens or the aughts or whatever of the 2000s that you would be experiencing some shit like that.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. I was like right in that sweet spot of, like I don't have a phone on me every day where I'm not recording it, but yeah, it's happening. And it was stuff beyond that, that's intimidating, but it's, and the thing that made it really real for me is that something weird that I find is like where Jewish and American culture clashes with the women and the men, because I take my dad's last name. So like my cousin, for example, she doesn't have a Jewish last name.
Oh, okay.
Whatever. But that's very identifiable. That's a very common question for Jewish people to ask each other, like, what's your last name? So you can show each other your papers, I suppose, or your pedigree.
Right.
But because I grew up with a very identifiable one,
like you could tell what tribe you came from just off of the name type of situation.
Yeah, you would know it. You would know I'm Jewish. Yeah. You would know off top. So, it's like, okay, that's something that like I could take my dad's last name and that's identifiable to everybody else. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, because I'm on, I'm a paper, whatever, identify myself. But my married last name is also a very Jewish name. My husband's not Jewish, but it just happens to be that way. So O is actually, O is actually a play. It's not my real last name. I was named after Jackie Kennedy, Jacqui Oh.
I see.
So, and it's also the way I spelled it is more of a Chinese, spelling.
Yeah, sure.
I do have some Chinese in there. Like I said, in that Indo mix, it gets really complicated. But but we were on the island until my mom was off it, essentially. So,
got it.
But yeah, so the Jewish thing, and I do know that some of my family had suffered in the Holocaust, so I do have that tie as well.
Oh, okay.
I do know that for a fact. And when I was pregnant as well, I've been pregnant twice, had both my babies healthy, and but there was the offering of testing for, because there's only certain diseases that Jewish people can get, which is kind of defining of a race or ethnicity. So.
Yeah, that's because I've known some people who had to do this where both spouses come from, is it from the Ashkenazi side of Jewish?
Yes.
sickness. Yeah, and they were like, yeah, we have to go do that test today or something like that. And that was sort of my exposure to that there's something very specific or that somehow the Jewish ethnic group managed to stay so close together that same disease didn't cross over somehow to other people? Or is it just like, for whatever reason, these are the only people that can get this? Can a mixed person get it?
From what I understand, yes. From what I understand, it exists because it was such a close-knit, if I don't want to use the term, like incestuous. I don't know that it was that, but
right.
You know what I mean? Because it was such a close, tight-knit, within the community, you marry within the community.
And so many cultures actually do have a component of this. Asian cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, where they still, that maybe not your first cousin or your sibling, but it might be like a fourth or third cousin or somebody that's distantly related, but somehow still there. And it's not frowned upon in the way that the Western society has started to do that.
Right. And even if I never even brought that up to the doctor. It was just on your paperwork, so they ask, and that's just the way we're treated differently.
Wow.
Yeah. But they also ask because of other situations, but it's like so it's just the way that you're treated differently. That you're like, oh, I identify this way because you're putting that on me. And there are some good, there are some valid reasons for it, and there are some invalid reasons for it.
Right.
So yeah. Sorry, tangent.
No, it's well. See, that's the thing that I love about the show is, you may start out kind of thinking you're going to talk about, one part, and then we end up going on a tangent. But it's exposing. Well, certainly it's exposing me to things that I don't quite know, or if I have like a glimmer of information about it, that it gives me a chance to learn a little more. But my audience is actually fairly broad. I have the largest portion of my audience is the U.S. and Canada, but and then next is like the U.K. and France. I've got a Australian and African. I finally got into South America in the last month or so. So there's people all in Russia. For some reason, I got tons of people from Russia that are listening to it. Like, shout out to mixed Russians. That just by us having a tangent conversation, you're exposing people all over the world to something that they may not have even thought of just generally, let alone tacking in that there's mixedness involved too. Like I just love it. It just.
Well, let me pander to your Russian audience a little bit because that's the side that I was looking at more. That's my Jewish side, and so I went back. This is a recent thing that I did. I've done it on my Indonesian side because it's easier, and I know like more of that side is more alive. Let's put it that way. So I went back and I looked, and I went on all these different sites, and I went all the way back, finally 7 generations on my dad's side, all the way back to Russia, and I always knew there was Russian. That my dad was like, yeah, it's Russian. I'm just like, okay, that's a whole lot of area to cover.
Pretty big space.
But finally went back to looking at records, boat records, and it was my family I had found came from Chechnya, and it was I believe, I'm gonna have to correct me if it was like 1700s maybe, where they were actually driving out Jewish people from Chechnya at that time, and that's why my family had come over here. So I think there's something to be said about, in any culture that's experienced oppression and PTSD, that can trickle down the line.
Right. Generational trauma is actually something that has come up on the show a few times. And most recently, I spoke with the author of the book Mostly White. Her name's Allison Hart. And it's a narrative book, but it's about 4 generations of mixed race women that are African American, Native American, and Irish, and sort of the trauma that you pass down because of what you experienced and stuff like that. And then eventually you're passing it down just through kind of osmosis. You're not even necessarily directly telling the other generations, but there's triggers that you will experience, I'm sure. You, like you said, you had people that were affected by or suffered in the Holocaust. And even though that's so many generations apart from you, there's a trauma there that you somehow have just received from from everybody's historical knowledge of it, but also your family's knowledge of it, and maybe how your family maneuvered certain places that they've lived because of that caution about, you know, you don't know if it could happen again type of thing. I think there's a lot to be said about intergenerational trauma being a real thing, and that it affects us, like our bodies and even how we raise our kids, or, you know.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing is on my Indo side, most of them, if not all of them, are here in America. So the trauma that happened in Indonesia, or, you know, that's all here in America now. But on my Jewish side, a lot have returned back to Israel and, you know, are militant over there. So, you know, I see it going both ways on my sides. But, you know, the reason that I have this, like, and I know this is going to sound, I'm being a little vulnerable here, but
Okay.
I know how this may come across to some people, but how it was for me, like, growing up is another part that I want to talk about my dad being transracial, and this side of me too is that transracial. I don't really like that term, but, you know, we'll talk about it. I never really saw the faux pas in saying I have a Black best friend, like, because it was true growing up. You know, and when when we got a little older and she was finding her identity more, as we both were, she told me that we couldn't be friends anymore because I wasn't Black, and she could only be friends with Black people, and that broke my little heart, you know.
Yeah.
So when I go into that space, that's why I'm just like hesitant to go into those spaces, because I'm like, that's gonna happen to me again. Like, you don't belong here because you're not really a part of it. Like, that's just that's just the little chip on my shoulder about that. But, you know, my dad, to go back to him about being raised in another culture, I often get confused for, you know, as we do as mixed people, for something that we're not.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of it. My husband's half Black, half white. Equally, we did a DNA test. It was like right on the money.
Oh, wow.
But when I met him, I was like, you are Japanese and Native American. I know it. Because that's common, right? Hey, shout out if you're out there. I mean, whatever. But, you know, like, I'm guilty of that too. But I get, often people think that I'm Mexican. That's like number one, go to, you're Mexican.
I feel like we all get some form of Latinx at some point. Like every mixed person I've spoken to at one time or another said, well, you know, surprisingly, I get Latin mostly. It's like, no, that's not surprising.
Yeah. Well, and so my dad, his mom, I never knew her, so I don't call her grandma because it's kind of weird to me, you know, not to be disrespectful, but she passed away when he was 12. Mm-hmm. So right in the prime. And when she passed, my grandpa, who I know and loved, and he's passed on, and, you know, all that stuff, but like, he kind of, you know, jumped ship at that point too. So there was never an official adoption. But, you know, like when you're 12, you got that best friend. Well, that was me when I was told that I wasn't Black, so we couldn't be friends. But, you know, you know, but you have that best friend, and you're like, they just took him in and are still family. You know, it's a generational thing again. But this family is Colombian. And so my dad is fluent in Spanish. I'm fluent in Spanish. My dad also grew up in East LA. So it's just, you know, growing up in a culture. My dad would also wear, I just remember him growing up wearing some stereotypical like Mexican stuff, you know, that just growing up in the culture in East LA. Like, he was in a Colombian family, but, you know, you're in Pomona. So he would have the long toe boots and like the tight black jeans with a big belt buckle and, you know, just the Jewish man's face and body in that. So, you know, not the hat, but so that's, you know, I just kind of grew up thinking that was normal.
I mean, it was though for you. It was your normal.
It really was. And so, you know, really close with them still. We're still, you know, it is family, and it's a weird kind of thing, you know, but it's like, you know, it's like the whole play cousins thing and all that stuff. But it's an interesting dynamic because that's something that my dad always told me too. And that's something that, you know, the racist things through the generations, but he also, you have to marry a Mexican is what he told me.
So not even a Colombian, a Mexican.
Yes, because he knew Colombians, so that was, you know, out of the picture. He wanted, you know, he had his intentions, which didn't happen for him. But it was more so the food than anything. But I'm not hating on Colombian food.
I mean, food comes up so often on the show too, as sort of that thing that bonds you to whatever cultures you come from, and if you find some kind of way to like mix mash your different foods together, it's like a way of feeling more complete, or you know. That's funny.
Yes.
That's funny that he was specific to Mexican.
Yeah,
I guess
and I had asked him why not other specific, and he gave me some, other racially specific things that, about like Guatemalans and stuff that you would probably hear a Mexican or a Colombian person say, like, just because within, like, you understand with being mixed with Japanese, right? So something that I heard, I forget who, I think it was Russell Peters, him, the comedian.
Yeah,
I think he was talking about how to differentiate the North versus Southern Asian cultures, and I forget what he said for North, but he definitely said for South it's called jungle Asian. Yeah. And I was just like, oh my God.
I know. I think I know what set you're talking about, and I don't remember what he called other ones. But yeah, even though I'm Japanese, and I grew up with a grandmother where it was very much, our culture was very much like, we're Japanese, they're Asian. That like we were different, we were special, that kind of thing. But I grew up in America around all different kinds of Asians, so even when I hear jungle Asian, even though technically there's no quote unquote jungle Asian, or what they mean when they say that of Japanese, that thing stands the hair up on the back of my neck too, because you're just like, where are we going with this one? Like, it's ugh.
I was like, okay, no thank you. Well, something interesting that happened to me later in life, because it's like, you're a kid and people focus on that and they're like, when did you realize it? And those stories fascinate me. They really do. Like, some are so simple. They're just like, well, I looked at my mom and I looked at my dad and I looked at me and it was like, duh.
Yeah.
Or you think your mom's an alien for a whole weekend, either way.
Oh, poor thing.
But I had gone, it was for an assignment that I had done, and I don't remember what it was exactly, but I was 17 or 18, so older. And I had gone to, I think it was for MLK Day. I'm pretty sure I had to go do something for it. But anyway, I ended up scoring tickets to go see Angela Davis speak at one of the churches out in Seattle. So, at 17, I'm aware, but I'm not aware of what's about,
right.
to happen. Right. And I'm just sitting there and I'm watching and I'm enjoying and I'm inspired and I'm ready to roll and do my thing, And she had the drawing, she had a drawing to win a book. And she, so I put my name in the hat just like everybody else, you get a ticket. And she did the drawing. And remember what I told you about my long ass name? She's having trouble with it, and I know it's me. And I'm like, oh shit, I'm about to go on stage with Angela Davis. What is happening right now? Like, I'm about to, I'm sweating, And she presents me with this book, and it really taught me a lot more about, because I'm pretty vocal on my side with my show about giving Asian women a platform and understanding the layers to being Jewish. So it's a book called Yellow, and it's by Frank H. Wu. Mm. And it was like my Bible at the time. So this was 2006 or 7. And in that book, I think it's I cherish it because it was given to me by her. But
yeah, sure.
It really goes into just those, I think, on both of my mom and my dad's side, something that I've experienced that's the same, is that it's so close to whiteness, but it's not, that it's confusing for people. Yeah. And I think that book, at least on the Asian side, is a really good explanation of what's different, what's the same, how the cultures are different, how they're the same, and why it gets so muddled as to privilege,
Yeah.
So it came at a perfect time for me as well, because within the Hispanic culture, that's also one of my biggest platforms that I do, just in my, not beyond my podcast, in my daily life, but I spent time with migrant children and migrant workers. And so immigration, and just seeing, when I tell you that I'm first generation here, my grandfather, he was an engineer in Indonesia, and also a professional soccer player. And when he got here, they didn't recognize that in him, and he worked at McDonald's for 20 years.
Right.
So, just stuff like that. That's what I'm really passionate about.
Talent. Like, this is the thing about fucking racism and prejudice against people who come to the States, that all that lost talent, those opportunities that could have been beneficial to America, but because it's coming packaged in a yellow or a brown face, they let it go. And we miss out on who knows what, because they didn't allow talented people to be, utilize them at their full potential.
Absolutely.
And yet it doesn't happen really with white immigrants. I'm like, I have both sides. I have a white immigrant grandmother and a Japanese immigrant grandmother. And the grind and the hard worker that my Japanese grandma was, in comparison to, I never saw my British grandmother work a day in her life. But I would see her criticize other immigrants for not speaking English or not speaking English properly. When,
yes.
It's easy for her. She's an English-speaking immigrant,
Right. Right.
Gosh, it's just that wasted talent just drives me insane.
When I was in high school, right around that time that I was seeing Angela Davis, my family took in an exchange student, and her and I have, just become family. She's my sister. I call her that, but she's from Holland, so she's white, but she's also not white. She's Jewish as well. So,
okay.
So me and her, get on that, but she speaks, again, 7 different languages. So the English, sometimes it's funny because sometimes she still is learning. It's really cute when we're talking and I say an idiom or something that she hasn't still heard before. And she's like, that is so interesting. What does that mean? And then I'm having to try to explain it, like, okay, wait a minute, let me try. But it's really cute. But I've been worried about her too, because she had been traveling back and forth, and especially in today, who's welcome, who's not, who's can you stay? Can you go?
It is a scary time. We have no idea what's happening. It seems to me it's safe to be a Russian traveler. But it doesn't, in terms of foreign travelers, but it doesn't seem like anybody else is okay.
So this is the time to monopolize on my Russian status, or no?
Something. Get in where you fit in, or something. I don't know.
Or it's not going to be bad. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have said that out loud on the show. Oh, no.
It's funny. There's these moments of so I always talk about myself as like a code switch ninja. I'm Japanese one minute, I'm black another minute, whatever. I never feel white, and yet I do have, it's funny, I'm half white, but I never feel white, and the only white person I know in my family is my British grandmother. Any whiteness to me seems very foreign, even though I grew up in the States and I'm surrounded by it and all that kind of stuff. It's just so different from my own experience. I don't know how to attach to it. But I have my Becky voice, I have my interview voice, my at work voice, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. And there are times when, I talk about like, gosh, it would just be so much easier if I were darker, because I would make a lot more sense if I were darker. Because right now, my name is Sharmane Latrice. I'm from Long Beach. I grew up in the hood. I grew up on welfare. All of my values and the social justice element that I fight for comes from what seems to be a very black place. So if I was darker, I would make a lot more sense. You would ask me a lot less questions about what's going on with my face and my name, if I was darker. So that's where my baggage is not being dark enough is where a lot of my throwback baggage is. But I say things from time to time that sound, and not that I've been accused on it from listeners or whatever, but usually it's actually people who know me, friends, family, my husband or whatever, where they were like, you should be a little bit more careful in how you talk about whiteness or, things like that on your show, because, now that you have sort of this public presence, it could be misconstrued. And I have this position that I'm like, you know what? There are things that I probably say that are absolutely problematic. Sure, everybody has some area in which they're problematic. But if I don't say it, then there's no opportunity to correct that information. Someone will catch it and be like, you know what? Actually, and then we can have a conversation, we have a dialogue, and it'll fix some of that thing. It's happened several times on the show in which I've talked to someone who comes, is mixed race, but maybe wasn't exposed to one side of their ethnicity or another, or maybe grew up in a really small town. And so they say something and you're like, whoa, especially if they're like mixed black, because that's more close to me. And I could be like, oh, I can tell that you were raised by white people. Let me help you so that you don't get the shit kicked out of you somewhere. Things like that come up. So I mean, I understand being uncomfortable, like when you said, you're like, oops, should I have said that? But I think like that's just an opportunity right there to be like, this from the information that I have right now, here's my take. And then if it is problematic, someone could jump in and be like, well, let's talk about
yeah.
it.
And that was just a snark. I'm like, I know I am on a ton of blacklists and other lists and stuff like that, but what you're saying, and that's the bottom line, and that's what I truly believe, is that if you're not talking about race, then you are complicit in racism.
100% agree.
Plain and simple.
Plain and simple. Right.
Thank you, Angela.
I know, like, I swear she's, and the stuff that they got going on with that whole taking away her reward and then giving it back to her bullshit, like, I don't even get me started. I will go on and on. But we are coming to the end of our show. So before we do wrap up, is there any other thoughts that you want to share with the audience real fast?
Let's see. A couple things before. I know that this show was meant to do this, so let me just make it clear that I'm talking like Obama right now. I do that. I kind of do these long pauses. Okay, first of all, I claim Obama too, just a little bit, because he grew up in Indonesia.
Right, he's got a half Indonesian sister.
Okay, so thank you, Obama. He can come over anytime for some tempeh. I got you. Okay, and there's probably some stuff here that wasn't like agreeable or anything, or wasn't reflected on your side, or hopefully I shed some light on something that somebody else was feeling that they never said before. So
right,
if that's the case, either way, I would love to hear some feedback.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's like the element that's kind of strange about this is in the beginning I was getting a lot, like almost every week, nothing went by where somebody didn't say, oh, da 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 da. Now I'm not getting as many responses from listeners, but I am getting well, they are listeners, but they're also like former guests who have stayed listening to it, and they're like, oh my gosh, if you ever do a panel, because I talk about wanting to do a couple panel episodes, they're like, get me with that person because we got stuff that we need to talk about, things like that. But I love the engagement. It makes me feel good when someone, inevitably, if you email me, I'm going to try to get you on the show and you'll become a part of the militantly mixed whatever, militia, mafia, whatever we become, spreading out that mixedness all over. But like, I want to hear if someone disagrees with me too. Like, I would love it. Oh gosh, it would be amazing to have another person who was Black, Japanese, and white, raised different from me, so we could get into it and be like, why are you weird? Like, what's your weird? Like, I want to get into it. So yes, if anything in this episode has sparked a chord with anybody, I hope that they do reach out. We'll share your social media and your contact at the very end, and I'll put it in the show notes as well, but they can also contact the show and I'll, route it your direction if it comes through that way. Let me just ask, what do you love about being mixed? Since we did talk about some of the harder parts of mixedness, what do you love about being mixed?
I didn't have an answer for this question for all week, and I knew it was going to just come to me, and I was being really negative about it.
Aww.
I kept thinking about it, and I was like, negative stuff kept coming up, and I was like, why? Don't be in that space. You know what I mean?
You're the first person I ever prepared for the question. I've never told anybody in advance the question. It's only if they've happened to listen to the show that if they knew.
Well, I had been mulling it over, and you know what I love about it is that I love learning more about it and just learning new things and having more than one thing to learn about. Just not that that's bad, but just really going through like a lesser known avenue of culture and finding out new things and discovering it. That's what I love, is learning new things about being mixed, and both mixes separately and together.
Yeah, but for me, I just kind of this is my mixed girl privilege I'm about to drop on you. Is I used to say things like, I feel bad for people who only have one culture, like I feel bad for people who only have people who look like them in their family, because I had what felt like a very rich and fun upbringing. There's absolutely problematic parts of my family, members of my family, things like that, stuff we had to hide from other sides of the family, definite trauma. But I got to be Japanese when I was in my grandmother's house. I got to learn how to drink a proper cup of tea in my Nana's house. You know, I can dance. I can assimilate into a hood Black culture because that's the culture I was raised in. You know, there's the only places I don't feel safe or adaptable is an entirely white American space, which is weird because I was born here. But I always feel like we have a little bit richer of an experience because we do get access to multiple cultures, and that's what is so fun about, you know, we got a lot we can learn and decide and adopt for our own families. You know, I mean, I'm not going to have kids, but you know, you have children, you can decide which part of your cultures you love the most and can share with them, and that will kind of inform and enrich who they are. I think it's awesome. I love being mixed.
Yeah, I pray for my kids because they're going to be in a whole different world than I am.
There's going to be a lot. They're going to have a lot of stuff to learn. All right, well, why don't you share everybody your show, how to listen to your show, how to find you, social media, and everything like that?
All right, so you can find my show. It is StartDis, all one word. It's for Start a Discussion. That's how we learn. That's what the show's about. My little tagline is, it is the show for people of conscious who like to learn a little bit about everything. So you'll find a little bit about everything on there. We go deep, we get weird, and we don't get censored, so you can find it pretty much on anywhere you find podcasts. I'm working on Pandora right now, so you're not going to find it there, but minus Pandora, you'll find it anywhere. And I'm working on right now practicing some voice talent work. So if you want to help me with that, audience, I do shout outs, and you can check that out on Patreon if you are a STAR student. It's all education themed. So if you become a STAR student, I shout you out at the end of the show in a random voice or accent of your choice if you become a teacher's pet. So you can go ahead and check that out. It's StartDis. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
No, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story. And I mean, I also appreciate that you shared things that you said you hadn't talked about before in other spaces, because that I'm sure that resonates with other people that are listening. So thank you.
Oh, yeah. I'm really happy. I'm really looking forward to it.
Militantly Mixed is a ManeHustle Media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Sharmane Johnson. Music is by David Bogan, The One. And if you like what you heard on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes and wherever you find your podcasts. ManeHustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.